Defining your own object can be a sort of daunting task. It seems really foreign compared to writing client classes. But when you break it down into what really makes up an object, you'll find these are the skills you've been using all along. Let's look at an example object. Here's a student object that maintains a few different pieces of information about a student and returns back some information. These variables placed up here are referred to as the state. These are the pieces of information maintained within the object that define, hey, what's going on with my object? The methods in your object are called the behavior. These are the different things you're providing to your user or client code so that they can make best use of your object. And the piece that tends to be newest to those who are first writing objects, the constructor. This is a very special method that's called whenever you use the new keyword. Let's break each of these pieces down. Here is the state of the student object. Really, it's just a list of variables that live within the entire scope of your object. Because they live within this entire scope, they're called fields. Field is an extra special position, so you're going to want to reserve this for data that's on a need-to-know basis. You really should try and limit how many fields you have. It's a good idea to always use the private keyword in front of any fields. This will prevent your user from directly changing the values of your fields, which is a good idea because you want to be more in control of that. If you forget the private keyword, it defaults to public, meaning they can just kind of muck around in your object without you having any say in it. Sometimes you'll see the this keyword placed in front of field names, like this. What this refers to is this is my field, as opposed to an external parameter. So here we have a name parameter that's passed in and saved in my internal field of the same name. By putting this in front of the left-hand one, I know, hey, I'm taking whatever external to me and saving it internally. This makes things a lot clearer. So you'll see that this keyword pop up in front of field names pretty regularly, just to make things easier. Next comes the constructor. The constructor is a special method that gets called whenever you instantiate a new object. It's got a kind of funny organization to it, but it does accept parameters, and then whatever you set inside your constructor happens whenever they make a new version of your object. So it's important to set all of the initial states for your fields here in the constructor. Java will provide a default constructor, meaning a constructor with no parameters and no work inside of it. So it's not very useful, but it makes sure that no matter what, even if you forget, you'll always be able to make a new version of your object. But chances are you'll want to define your own constructor. You can also have multiple constructors. Constructors can take in a whole varying range of parameters. Say, for example, we have a set of default values, and you can either define your own or you can accept the defaults. You could have a constructor with no parameters that uses all the defaults, or you could have a constructor with all the parameters so you can be really specific about what you want the fields to be. Because they have a different set of parameters, the constructors can all coexist, and the computer will still know which one you mean when your user uses it. Finally, there's the behavior. The behavior is the list of methods within your class such that you can provide work for the client. A common class of behaviors are getter methods. Because you've made your fields private, sometimes you'll still want your user to know what's going on, even if they can't do anything about it. So a lot of times, a getter method simply just returns back the current state of a field. There's also something we call setters. This takes in external information from your user and updates the state of your object. Now, this setter is kind of silly. It sort of defeats the purpose of a private field, but you can imagine adding pieces here like throwing an exception for trying to add a bad value or limiting which values your user can set. In addition to what other methods you come up with, another common one are overrides. Every object comes with, for example, a toString method. But if you don't specify it, Java's going to try and guess what your toString should be and it's rarely correct. So when you use this exact method header, you override whatever Java's default is, and it'll choose your definition instead. So it's always important to make sure you know what Java's providing so you can make sure that it's acting exactly as you want it to. These three pieces of an object, state, constructor, and behavior, are all that comes with designing your own objects. And if you simply think about them as variables that are a little bit elevated and methods that are very specific about how somebody's going to interact with your object, well, actually, you've had the skills to write your own objects all along.